Hey, Rod. What's going on with you today?
What's going on, man? Just got done meditating.
Mm.
Got this new app I'm using called Insight Timer. It's free. Yeah, it's free. That's why I like it. It's free. There are. That's not why I like it, because there's a lot of good meditations. But there is a paid version. I don't use that. It's not that expensive, but I don't use it because
It's a good plug.
There's a lot of meditations for free, like all kinds of different types, and it's pretty dope.
Why? Like, what's good about this one?
I like it.
Well, when you don't have a reason, that's a good enough one. Welcome to, or welcome back to, More in Common. This is our social experiment. See, everyone has a story that can help us learn from one another. And we bring people into this safe space that we have learned to create so we can learn about their stories and get into difficult topics that challenge us in conversation and ultimately how we think.
And we have a lot of these conversations, and we're seeing a lot of similar threads through all of them. So what we're doing is breaking down these conversations to create a set of tools and a map that'll help you become a conversation boss so that you can be a catalyst for conversation in your day-to-day life. Go ahead and get out to www.moreincommonpod.com, the place for all things more in common. Check us out. And if you're feeling like it, share an episode. Just share it. Do it. All right. Before we get into talking about last episode, we're going to talk about some review action.
Yeah, because here's the thing. Like, if you like us and you want to review us and help us get our name out there, continue to review us. Like this person who I think I know who it is, but they don't list their name. Still hungry customer, 1 million. I had the privilege of being interviewed by these two brilliant men. Again, I promise I'm reading that. I am not making it up. It was a great experience, and we really went deep into topics I never thought we would. Definitely a great podcast in general, with deep dives into touchy subjects. Again, I think I know who it is, but since it's not listed, I'm not going to say it. But thank you very much, as always. We appreciate the support. It means the world to us. And now, back to our prior episode with Phil. Rodney, what'd you take from it?
I was going to ask you what you took from it first, but...
Oh, I mean, I can go first. That's cool. I think for me, when it comes, with Phil, is just how he embraced that conversation about prayer and God. I said this at the beginning of the episode as a conversation tip, but the way he responded made it a space of easy engagement, right? Because he could easily get frustrated or, defensive, especially when it's an early question in the discussion. And that just speaks to the safe space, right? And I think he represented that well. And just generally his overall perspective on working for a corporation, right? And how optimistically he takes that while he's still pursuing his entrepreneurial desires, right? Like, it's still his number one investor. He still works and it serves its purpose. And I know sometimes we've had the opposite mentality of it being a burden of frustration and annoyance. And it really has helped me frame up how I think about it. And I'm actually constantly using that advice to remind myself as we continue to work through this transition. How about you?
He's got a lot of perspective and a lot of balance. Like, even the God conversation, having grown up with various religious views and perspectives and influences, just gives him a lot of perspective, and he's thought about it a lot. And then the same thing with his dad and his mom and their views on work and the types of work, and him, entrepreneur versus corporate, and he's just got a lot of balance. And I thought, to what you just said, that was very helpful for me even. to go into that further. And yeah, man. So it was a great convo. Who do we have this week? I think we have George Dover. Is that?
Yeah, our man George Dover, right? George came to us as he is the father of one of our earlier guests, Brescia Dover. You may remember Brescia. She was actually our first conversation about mental health, mental illness. And George, of course, being her dad, has had a significant role in Brescia's journey. So we're not here to talk about Brescia. We talk about George and a lot of things. But he grew up in the Mormon church. And he left the church and now claims himself as an atheist. All of this is relevant to the conversation indeed. He is a skeptic at heart with a very open mind. He values family above all else and has an incredible perspective on what it means to have unconditional acceptance. I teased a few things, but what do we talk about there, Rod?
Well, we talked about what it's like being the father of a child managing through something difficult. In this case, mental health issues. We talked about the use of the word crazy. That's something that comes up quite often for us, and the Mormon church thing. That was actually a big reason we had him on to talk about that, and we get into some other things as well. Something that stuck out for me. You mentioned in his bio that he's a skeptic at heart. And I think we actually talk about this a little bit in the conversation, but he's a skeptic in the literal sense of the word, he's not a pessimist. He's not trying to poke holes in things. He's trying to understand things, and he is super open-minded, and he is open to his children being in the Mormon church, even though he's not. He's open to his family being into it, even though he's not. He is, like when I think of somebody who wants answers and is looking for answers and is trying to find and love people where they are and for who they are, I think I'm thinking of George right now, because it's just like he really, really embodies those terms and I hope it comes through. I think it comes through. It came through talking to him. What about conversation tips? What'd you get out of that?
Yeah. Compassion, empathy. A lot of times when we're engaged in a conversation, we don't necessarily think about the words we use, or we don't think about their impact until we're in it. And this is something we explicitly talk about as it relates to the word crazy. And I just think it's a good tip when in a conversation is that you really don't know what the other person's experience is. And sometimes, we can't monitor all the words that we say, but it's important to, just check in and make sure that you follow the line with the other person and make sure you're on the same page. And, to Rodney's point just there, just his use of skepticism to drive curiosity. I think this is something that actually is an interesting component of driving to a better conversation. Is maintaining curiosity is something we talk about a lot, but if you're skeptic in its raw sense of the term, you're just forever interested in trying to understand. So I think it's an interesting pivot in the conversation tips, but it's one that not everybody might be able to employ, but it's, I think, a good one nonetheless. So George Dover, definitely an awesome conversation, and enjoy it. I know we did.
When I talk about unconditional acceptance, it's the word unconditional is a really important part of that. It works in my family. It works between me and one of my brothers, where I think it becomes very difficult to truly accept someone unconditionally within a relationship is when someone in that relationship or both make ultimate truth claims.
Welcome, everybody. We are here with George Dover. George, good to see you again, my man. How are you?
I'm good. Nice to see you, Rodney.
Nice to see you.
Been a little while.
It's been a while since we met, and it was Super Bowl Sunday. Keith, close your ears. I know this is going to be painful. It was Super Bowl Sunday. We were looking at the what's the resort? I don't remember the resort in Hawaii, but it was out there where the big surf breaks are. Patriots and the Eagles were getting it on, and you and Susie, your wife, saw me walk by with our "Be Brave Enough to Start a Conversation That Matters" shirt, and you did exactly that. And you said, "What's that about?" And have you ever talked about mental health issues? And hey, you should meet our daughter. And I really got to thank you for that. I mean, just like for saying anything, and then for being bold enough to introduce this stranger wearing this shirt in Hawaii to introduce him to your daughter and to have him on his podcast. And it's been we're very fortunate for that. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet. She's a great one to talk to and have real conversations with. So.
Yeah. And today we're gonna get into your story because you have some interesting stuff going on. So Keith.
It's interesting your connection, your establishing our connection to Brescia, because at the time we hadn't talked about mental health, and now I think it's probably our number one topic of discussion across the spectrum. So it definitely kicked off a great topic for us to tackle. That being said, you are Brescia's dad from Brescia. For those who may not remember, episode 19, highly encourage going back and listening.
Absolutely.
As she struggled with anorexia, bipolar, continues to struggle with that today. And through her story, one of the things that was really, I think, emotional for me, having been a new dad at the time, or a first-time dad at the time, you know, just how you managed and worked through that as a parent to a child, a young child struggling with mental health issues. So I'd love to start there and understand it from your perspective and get, you know, a different viewpoint on how that all impacted you, and kind of an open-ended conversation. I'm sure you have a lot to say on it. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's definitely, we could probably talk all day about Brescia and being a dad of somebody that struggled with mental health issues. You know, Brescia really was a perfect child. And the first mental health challenge that she had was anorexia. And, you know, up until that started, well, it started way before we knew about it, first of all. So she was a perfect child. You know, we were part of the Mormon church at the time, and she was this perfect little Mormon girl, obedient for the most part. She always had a problem telling the truth. She would say little lies to get her brother in trouble and stuff. So she always struggled with that, but those were just minor things. Aside from that, she really was this perfect child, and she was her and I were really close. So we always have been and still are. She's best friends with her mom, but she has this kind of unique relationship with me. But, you know, she was about 10 years old and just started to really act up and do things like, you know, run and hide, and we couldn't find her. And she would do these strange things. She would cook cookies. She just started acting completely different and in a problematic way. She was becoming disrespectful and really just, we had no idea what was going on. And somehow, I mean, we've been dealing with that for a couple of months, and my wife picked up a book about, you know, we started noticing that she wasn't eating very much, and she was thinning up, and she was already thin to begin with. And my wife picked up a book about anorexia, and we were laying in bed one night and she was reading it, and she just started going, oh my God, because this book was describing all of these weird things that Brescia was doing, like making cookies and taking them to somebody to eat, but not touching them, being during dinner time, trying to act like she was this great little mama's helper, putting plates out and doing everything, but yet finding ways to avoid eating. And we recognized then that she had an eating disorder, and that was the first time we knew that there was a problem, and it wasn't just that she was acting up. So that began a process of us trying to understand it, and we, going to different, every different counselor we could find, and it just became worse and worse. She started completely acting out, yelling and screaming in counselors' appointments. At one point, she was so angry after an appointment, we were driving down the freeway, and she literally opened up the door and tried to jump out of the car. I was driving, and I reached back and I grabbed onto her, and I was holding her in the car while I was driving down the freeway.
Wow.
Just, and she was horribly mean to her brother through the process. And it was difficult to be, as parents, it was really difficult because with her sickness, so much of our attention had to turn to try and help her. So her brothers need our attention also, and she's treating them really badly, and we're trying to find a balance there. And and then I'm still trying to work, and Susie's trying to grasp it all. I think when you talk about mental health issues, whether it's anorexia or bipolar or whatever, they're horrible illnesses and diseases, but the effect they have on the loved ones of those people is extreme, and it really absolutely throws you for a loop. You question whether you're ever this perfect daughter that I thought I had. That many times throughout her struggles with anorexia, and then again their struggles with bipolar, you wonder if you're ever going to have her back, and it feels like it will never end. And it's a long process to get on top of it. I think. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, had you had exposure to mental health challenges prior?
No, I've had no exposure to mental health challenges prior. Didn't at the time initially, and that's why mental health, when Rodney, when we met you in Hawaii and saw what was on your t-shirt, that, to us, there's certain conversations that really matter, and mental health is at the top of that list. And it has been since we've had children that deal with it. But until that happened, I was just like everybody else. My wife and I were just like everybody else, that, we didn't talk about it, and we would just throw out, oh, he's crazy, or this, and we would use that just as a normal term, not trying to be mean to anyone, or not, just as everybody, people generally say that every day. Oh, that's crazy. He's crazy. Mm-hmm. When Brescia actually went psychotic, multiple times, being bipolar, all of a sudden, when somebody would say he's crazy or she's crazy, just referring to somebody that's not suffering mental illness but is doing something weird, mm-hmm. it hits you. I think it's in a way that racist slurs might hit people that deal with racism. Mm-hmm. When my daughter actually is crazy and we're trying to bring her out of psychosis, and then somebody says something like that, you hear it completely different in a different way.
Yeah. I have a question real quick. You mentioned brothers, sons. Have you talked to them about that? Like, I don't know if in it or even after it, the fact that you were trying to balance it, and this is probably one of the lovely pieces of being a parent where you don't get to open up on everything that you're doing. You just have to just do it. But like, did you have an opportunity or have a way to communicate with them, like how you were trying to manage that, or trying to show them love and support at the same time, or like how did that manifest for you and them?
We certainly do now. Brescia's so Marcus is 18 right now, and so he was the one that was old enough to get what was going on when Brescia was suffering through these things, and he was the one that Brescia took all of her, all of her issues out on, and he's the one that kind of lost my attention when Brescia had to have it because she was sick.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, Brescia and he wouldn't talk to her. He was quiet. He was kind of reserved at the time. She was bigger than him at the time. Now he's 6 foot and really big and strong and stuff. But at the time he would have been 6 or 7, maybe 8, and as we were going through a lot of this, and we couldn't really sit there and reason with him and explain why we're having to pay so much attention to Brescia, and why Brescia's in the hospital, why mom's in Denver for a month with Brescia because she's sick.
Mm-hmm.
He hated her, and he didn't understand it. But over time, as Brescia got her health back, he understood, and he and Brescia have an incredible relationship now, but it's taken time.
Yeah.
It hurt. He does not express his feelings well either, and it hurt him a lot during that time. Since as we've gone on and progress is made and Brescia has done so well, he gets it, and he's an advocate for mental health too, and he gets that mental health is an illness, and he doesn't hold any resentment at all at this point. But
that I'm glad to hear that progress, right? For everybody's sake. I'm curious. You didn't have exposure before. I think you talked about it. It wasn't a thing in your life, so it wasn't something that had your attention. How was it that you and Susie took the approach to evaluate Brescia's behavior in a way that didn't just, my child's awful, and yell at her all the time and scream? You went the route of, this is it. We need to evaluate and go and kind of diagnose that there's something there, and then embrace it as something that you needed to take part in helping work through. What is that for you? How did that come about? I'm fascinated, because I don't think everybody would be so open to it, especially having the prior exposure that you had or didn't have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I don't know if I have the answer to it, other than as a again, as the father of someone who suffers from multiple people who have mental illness challenges, I firmly believe that mental illnesses are sicknesses, and no different than cancer is a sickness. And it's not a choice for people who become mentally ill. And I don't know why that's the path that Susie and I took as we started to understand and deal with Brescia's situation. I could have easily, and frankly, I think, I don't want to stereotype people, but so often fathers and husbands and loved ones just in general of people who have mental illness think that it's a choice by the person that's suffering, and just get, the term, just get over it, just eat. With anorexia, people would say, well, why doesn't she just eat? And her anorexia, she it wasn't that she didn't want to eat. She wasn't choosing to be anorexic,
right.
But it progressed until she was so sick that she could not eat. On Christmas Eve, I took her to the hospital because we thought she was going to die. She hadn't eaten anything for almost a week. We're in the emergency room, and they bring in food, and she's going to spend Christmas and multiple days in the emergency room or she can just eat and come home, and she can't eat. It's not that she chose not to eat; she just couldn't do it. And so, Keith, that's a good. I think if I could, I think if I could understand why Susie and I stepped back and really tried to understand mental illness instead of judge it initially, I think that might help a lot of people understand how to deal with mental illness. I don't know why we did that, but I'm so grateful that we did. And, accepting that Brescia was sick instead of just making bad decisions and being difficult is what allowed us to help her. If you don't believe somebody's sick, how can you help them?
If I may, sorry, just something.
Yeah.
When you were telling the initial story, and I really love that question, Keith. It seems, just from the little bit I know about you from meeting you and just this conversation, I would say it seems like you're very in tune with your family, and just even the way you detailed Brescia prior and after, you felt a change. And then Susie reading that book, call it serendipity, call it divine intervention, call it whatever you will, like that you saw there was something, didn't know what it was, and then she read something that's like, man, this is hitting like a lot of the things that we're seeing, and you being you cared, like you were like, hey, let's explore this. I don't know what I don't know. Let's jump in. I'm sure there's more. I'm sure there's more to it, but that's just some stuff that
if you don't really believe that the person is sick, then that would be really difficult to act appropriately. And that's why the conversation around mental illness is really important, because it's starting to be a conversation that people are more willing to have. Mm-hmm. And if they're more willing to have the conversation, then they're more open to learning about it and understanding it. And the more they hear and the more they understand it, until they get to the point where they actually believe that depression, anorexia, bipolar, schizophrenia, whatever the mental challenge could be, addictions and all these types of things, until they are willing to look at that person as if they had, in the same way they would look at somebody if they had cancer. Because if they don't, if they're judging that person and saying, oh, well, why are they depressed? Their life's not that bad. Just get out of bed. Pick yourself up and go do something. Try harder. Just eat some food. Just eat something. As long as that is their perspective, then they're not going to be able to help those people. And they're going to be part of the problem. So the conversation has to start first. It's starting. It's happening. Organizations are pushing it through, and famous people, athletes are starting to come out about their challenges with mental health and mental illnesses. And the more that happens, then the more people will start to understand, and then hopefully more resources are available, and we're able to treat people who are struggling with mental health issues as people that are sick and need help, and get them the help that they need.
You said something at the beginning of that. Sorry, Keith, real quick. You said something there that I think is even more basic than that piece. Like, because like seeing somebody that's bipolar as somebody like this is not a choice. It's a sickness. It's an illness. But you mentioned like being willing to believe that they're sick. Like you had a fundamental belief that your daughter was a good person, a good child. And then these things started happening. It's like, okay, something else is happening. Like, what else is going on? So there's kind of the assumption of good intent, the belief in people, like the belief that they're like, are they doing this to me, or is something happening to them? Like that pivot of, just that little bit of like, like what's going on? Do I need to give a little grace here to see if there's something more to the picture? And I kind of think is something that's lacking in society in general, but I think it opens that door in order to be able to say, maybe there's a mental health challenge going on here in a case like that. But thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I've had a question that I've wanted to ask since we first talked to Brescia. When you guys went to visit the ranch, it was your brother, her uncle,
my uncle. Yeah.
Your uncle, and she met Blue. and she ate for the first time.
You're gonna make me cry.
Like,
I said I wasn't gonna cry today, Keith.
I'm very from a pure I've always wanted to know what that moment was like for you.
Yeah, I was happy to share that because I remember it vividly. You know, I took Brescia up to, it's in Cody, Wyoming. I took her there against our doctor's advice.
Oh, really?
They wanted her in the hospital, but Brescia had been pleading with me to get her around horses for months. I mean, it's, for whatever reason, through this whole anorexia battle, Brescia just wanted to be around horses. We took her to riding places where she could learn as she was digressing, hoping it would help, and taught her opportunities that we could. But she said, Dad, if I can just have a horse, everything will be all right. And I mean, animals are therapeutic, but she had this love for horses at the time. And, but she was going downhill again fast. This is after she'd spent a week in the psychiatric unit at the Phoenix Children's Hospital, after Susie and her had spent a month in Denver, the Children's Hospital there, where she'd been inpatient and outpatient and had made some progress, but then she came home and then she started deteriorating again. And so the doctor that we were working with wanted her back in the hospital. My question to them was, if I take Brescia up there for 1 week and she doesn't eat, is she going to die? And they said, no, she's not. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, I'm taking her up. So, I talked to my aunt and uncle and stuff, and we flew up there. We flew to Billings, rented a car, and drove over there. And right as we got there, my uncle took her out to the horses, and she was walking around the corrals and petting the horses and stuff, and just happy as can be. Her and her like 80-pound body, and they're kind of, my aunt and uncle are greatest people in the world, but they're kind of small town, and every time even when I was there as a kid, my aunt would prepare dinner and she'd ring the bell outside the back door, and we're down at the pastures and stuff playing with the animals and stuff, and that meant come up for dinner. So I was down there with Brescia, and she rang the bell, and I'm just like, oh shit, here we go. We're going to get up there, and she's not going to eat anything, and my aunt and uncle are going to see, and they're not going to understand why. And I mean, I told them what would happen, but
yeah, you were expecting that. You're expecting that response that people have.
I don't think they really internalized it. And she'd made hamburgers of all things, and I'm just like, oh man, here we go. And so we sat down at the table, and my aunt dished up, put a burger and a bun for Brescia, and she ate the whole thing. And I was dying. I could not believe it. And I was just in shock. I got up, went out back, and called Susie, and I'm like, you're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe it. Brescia just ate a hamburger. And it was amazing. And she, it wasn't like she stuffed herself, but she ate a hamburger, and she started eating. And, also, in my family, we kind of give our kids probably too many choices. Oh, you don't want to eat this? Oh, we'll order that, or, you order this or that. Up there, you eat. If you don't eat what she puts on the table, you don't eat. Yeah. You're not just going to get in the car and drive into town and, go to a restaurant or order DoorDash or something like that. It doesn't happen. Right. So, she ate dinner, and she continued to do it, and breakfast. And I was amazed. I think I stayed there with her for 2 days, and then I left, and she spent the next couple of months up there. And that was the beginning of her healing that took, So she spent almost 2 months there, I think, and Susie and I went back up to get her. And the first night we were there, we went to the rodeo. The Cody Night Rodeo is a big thing in summer up there, and Brescia was on blue and perfectly rode blue in the rodeo, in an event. Mm-hmm. She did the barrel racing where you go around all 3 barrels and rode out, and I couldn't believe it. So so I felt that was an incredible experience, and Definitely have a lot of love and gratitude for my aunt and uncle that facilitated that for us.
Thank you for sharing that. Damn it, Keith. I said to myself I was not going to cry. I got something flew in my eye. That's what happened. Yeah. I'm not.
When someone's my last question on this topic, because there's something you said before that I really want to dig into, but as they're crazy, like you were talking about it, because they're not around it and you have that, right? Like, how do you approach that situation in an effort to help manage that conversation around mental health? Or do you, or does it depend on who it is? Like, do you have an approach to, if you're around someone and they say, man, that guy's just crazy?
It's a really good question.
It's kind of one of those things where, like, because I've literally lived through Brescia, having manic episodes and psychotic episodes, and I've seen her truly in a crazy state where nothing she does or says makes any sense, and she can't come out of it until you really sedate her and give her certain medications for a few days. And so now when I hear somebody say that just in a unthoughtful way, it kind of hits me. I mean, I don't know. If I was part of some group that, I don't know whether it's race or what, some race that has discrimination against them in certain ways, and then there's words that can be used to speak negatively about your ethnicity or your group or your status, and I'd imagine those words would kind of cut if that happened. And that's the way I feel when somebody says, just says that's crazy. I feel like I don't say that anymore. I think, I don't know, it's a good question. Generally, when somebody says that, I just hear it and it kind of pinches my ears. And then I have to realize that they just don't realize that why I don't like that word to just be used carelessly.
Have you ever mentioned that to anybody who said it, or like it really, like there's a moment where it just really cut and you're like, hey, I'm not a big fan of that word, or is it more something that you internalize? And
yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I think if I'm maybe a little bit more aware of the opportunities to engage in a conversation when somebody says that, I could turn it into something like that. I think in most cases where I'm talking to somebody and I hear that, we're not talking about mental health, and we're maybe not even talking about something too serious, and they just use that word because it's part of their vocabulary. So I don't know if I have examples of, calling somebody out for using that word, or just explaining to them how it makes me feel. But I don't know about that. But
I was just curious.
I will tell you, we really do have a lot of opportunities where we just very blatantly introduce ourselves as advocates of mental health. I mean, like we did with you, Rodney, in Hawaii. So
yeah. So I had to take a bit of a step back to go to a point that you said she was the perfect Mormon child.
Yeah, I wrote that down.
And like we've talked a lot about you as a parent to Brescia, but let's talk about you and your journey. I mean, you I don't know if the word is defected, but you separated from the Mormon church, and Mormonism has been a big part of your life. Like, let's talk about, first of all, what does the perfect Mormon child look like? And then second, why did you leave the Mormon church?
Well, like even your background within that as well. Like, how long were you in the Mormon church? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I come from a multi-generations of Mormons. My parents met at Brigham Young University, and
BYU.
After my dad got back from a Mormon mission and got married in a Mormon temple. They started having kids pretty quickly. I have a family of 6 kids. My wife comes from a family of 6 kids. Her parents met at BYU, got married and started having a lot of kids. My father-in-law's worked for the church farm system his whole life. He just recently retired, but I grew up in Bountiful, Utah, which is just north of Salt Lake City, and as wild as it may sound, even up until I was in high school, I could rarely even contemplate that any cultures outside of Mormonism existed. I was not given, my parents were great parents within the culture of what they believed. And, my parents are full of love for me still. And they full of love for everybody. But for Orthodox Mormons, the religion governs every moment of their waking day and every thought, and their schedules are based around it. Their perspective of life, of everything, it's so completely encompassing within your life that I.
Sorry to interject, but is that what you mean by the Mormon culture? The Mormon culture. I mean,
even where I live right now in Gilbert, Arizona, the Mormon culture is huge, almost similarly to where it was when I grew up in Bountiful, Utah. But the point is that my parents didn't teach me anything but Mormonism. So, and the one thing about and Mormonism teaches that the church makes the claim that it is the one and only true church on the earth, and that its leader is the mouthpiece for God, and that only that church has authority given to it from God to baptize and do all these things. And I believed all this. I really, really believed it, and I was not given any opportunity to understand anything else. Ultimately, when I was, and Mormon has a strict law of sexual purity, and it has what they call a word of wisdom, where you don't drink and those types of things. And when I was in high school, I kind of rebelled against that just because I was in high school. But I never stopped believing that the Mormon church was the true church, and everybody else was wrong. And the concept is that you have to actually be a Mormon if you're going to go to heaven. And they don't say it like that, but that's essentially the concept. So I went on after a little bit of a wild phase, I went on a Mormon mission. I came back. I met Susie, who was the sister of one of my missionary companions. We got married in the temple. We started having kids. But then I was out of Utah, and I was progressing in my professional career, and I was meeting a lot of new people, and I was seeing other cultures, and I was, I guess, having enough courage to start to look outside of Mormonism. And, at a certain point, I did enough research, and I found out that all of these things that I was taught by my parents and by the Mormon church as historical truths and ultimate truths were simply either completely fabricated or just not correct. And initially that hit me like a ton of bricks, but I do have a tendency to be extreme in the things that I do. So when I was in that church, I was extreme. And when I had this realization, I was fairly extreme too. And I was afraid, initially I was kind of afraid that Susie would leave me, and that happens a lot. So I kept going to church. I didn't tell her how I felt. I completely stopped believing in the church, but.
Yeah. So what did you start disagreeing with in the book? Like, What started heading in a direction for you that is it all organized religion? Like, do you practice any any dogma today? Do you go to any church today, or like how far does that separation from the Mormon Church go for you?
Yeah, I don't. At this point, I would. I definitely identify as an atheist, but with a caveat that my atheism only goes as far as the evidence that I can see. I mean, I love the concepts that the Mormon Church teaches. I mean, the Mormon Church teaches that families, units stay together, not just through life on this earth, but forever. So, technically, if I hadn't left the church, then the fact that I married my wife in a Mormon temple would have given us eligibility to stay married after we die and live in a, it's called exaltation to the Mormons, but to live in a perfect state of complete bliss, and continue to build a family in that realm until we literally reached a point of perfection where we became gods ourselves and did the exact same experience for our billions of children that our God is doing for us here. So it's it's crazy belief, but that is the belief. It is.
It happens. It happens.
Wild belief, right?
Isn't that part of the reason, like that belief right there, part of the reason why the Mormon Church is so into genealogy?
Yep. Yeah. Because if Susie and I, at this point, so assuming Susie and I die now without having our marriage, because by us leaving the church, we've negated our temple marriage, according to the church. Okay, so we would have to then, after we die, someone here on earth would go to a Mormon temple and be married on behalf of Susie and I again. And then that would be valid for Susie and I in the next life if we, there's other things that have to go to it, but we would have to accept it. I'd have to go up there and see God, and he'd have to tell me, you know what, George, you're so stupid. I gave you everything, and you left, and, it was Mormonism all along. And now, now everybody's got to, now you got to be rebaptized. Somebody's got to be rebaptized for you on earth. They got to be remarried for you. And you made it all complicated.
Yeah.
So it's a weird concept, as I look at it now from my perspective, I haven't been out of the church for 10 years. The concepts and the beliefs are just so hard it's so hard for me to realize that I actually bought it and believed it, went out on a mission and preached it for 2 years.
To the point of like shame or like regret or feeling duped.
When initially I felt really duped. I felt really betrayed by the church. And I think I also felt a lot of resentment towards my mom and dad for not being more open to the world and to what the world was about, and giving me options, and accepting me unconditionally instead of, based on how I progressed within the Mormon church, whether I went on a mission, whether I was a good kid, based on Mormon standards, those types of things. So
how did you, so what was it that triggered this for you? And how did you, you went from what you just said, if you didn't do these things, there was maybe negative judgment, negative consequence, even from your family. Like, how did you reconcile that within yourself to actually take action eventually, especially after you were married and had kids?
Well, I had one of my business partners, had a long conversation with him one day, and he had been learning a lot about church history, and he started telling me things I'd never heard before. And about inaccuracies about the story of how Mormonism came about, the way I knew it and the way it had always been taught to me growing up and in church versus what really happened. And that conversation, that was one night, and it really, really blew me away. But this is somebody that I really respected and had a lot of confidence in, and so I couldn't just throw away what he told me. And so then I just, in the day of the internet, I started doing my own research, reading, starting to read things that previously I wouldn't, because of church guidance, I wouldn't have read before. Because there's a lot of information that the church that isn't sponsored by the church or isn't actual church. The Mormon Church has their own bookstore. It's called Deseret Book, and Mormons, when they want to read, they go and get approved church material
so they
there.
have to read church approved material.
And then anything outside of that, they would, if they're reading outside of that material about the church, they would risk reading anti-Mormon literature.
So that's like anti-sanctioned material.
Yeah, you don't do that.
Unsanctioned. Yeah.
So a lot of people, a lot of people like my family, my mom and dad, brothers and sisters, they, for the most part, I've got one brother that's way more open to it, but they won't allow themselves to investigate or learn what I know about Mormon history and the Mormon Church, because they like the bubble that they're in, and it works for them. So for me, learning, I instead wanted to know, and just so many things came to light, things that I believed were true and had actually happened, and either they never happened or the story that I was told was a complete, a very incorrect version. Things like the Mormon migration, the pioneers, and what really drove that. That was a big thing for me. I mean, there's a lot around Joseph Smith. Polygamy is an issue.
On the Mormon migration, what was the reason? I think I know, but I may not.
Well, in Mormon history, the reason for migrating to the Salt Lake Valley was to escape the persecution that the Mormons were getting in the East, and to be able to worship and worship the way they wanted to. And the church portrays that as the Mormons were a very persecuted people out there. And
that'd be the story I've heard.
That's the story. But there's a lot of history around that. And, Brigham Young, I think Brigham Young created that migration, for a lot of selfish and prideful purposes.
At the beginning, before we started actually recording, when we were doing Rapid Fire, you mentioned you were very skeptical. Is this why?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I'm a very skeptical person at this point, and I think it serves me pretty well. It's not, and there's difference between. And one of the podcasts you did with somebody, I can't remember his name, but you guys were talking about optimism and
pessimism with Jansen.
Yeah. And as I was listening to you guys, I was thinking about how pessimism is often, at least it seems to be, a negative quality. Somebody's always pessimistic, they're grumpy, or and that's not at all what I'm talking about. I just think that being skeptical, but being open and learning to listen to people is a vital way to.
On earth do you manage being skeptical and being open to listen to other people to learn?
Well, because the word skeptical actually means not easily convinced. It doesn't mean there's a synonym for dubious, but I don't know if that's a real good synonym. It just means not easily convinced.
Yeah, but I mean, you guys can be. You
good.
guys talk to a lot of different people with different
Yeah.
perspectives and different ideas, and you listen to all of them. But I mean, I probably, you know, if I'm sitting here as an atheist, and it would be beyond me to try to convince you guys. You're skeptical in the sense that I doubt I could probably convince you that there's no God.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't even want to do, I mean, but I just, being skeptical doesn't, I think it encourages conversation, actually. If somebody's telling me something, I'm initially not going to believe it, but because of that, because I'm not easily convinced, then I can ask them questions about it, and they may very well be right, or there may be some value to it, and my skepticism is just going to prolong that conversation. I'm not going to I don't mean fire back and say, I just don't think that you're right. That can't be right.
Yeah.
Just, listen to it, and then, well, what about this? What about that? And
you just said it would be potentially hard to convince us, like, we should become atheists, or if we're not, we should. But then the key part is you said you wouldn't even want to try. Why is that? Is that because you felt like this was kind of shoved down your throat, like when you were growing up and you didn't have a choice, and you're not trying to push your beliefs on anybody else, or how, like, why is that for you?
I don't. There's no benefit in me convincing somebody of atheism. If somebody finds value in believing in God, which all of my family does, and my son, Marcus, my 18-year-old son, got rebaptized into the church and just got a call to go on a Mormon mission. So I wouldn't want it. He finds value in that. I think it's going to be a good experience for him. I don't believe in all the things that he's going to be teaching, but I wouldn't want to convince somebody that I'm right and their belief system is wrong when they find peace in their belief system.
Why? This is something that's so crucial to Keith and I's relationship and this podcast,
Yeah.
and we think conversations in general. But how are you actually? Do you know why or how you believe that? Like, your son is gone back to the place where you're like, I felt wronged, I felt duped, How do you? Like, that's a powerful, powerful thing that, like, if we could define that, I think we'd be super rich.
Bottle it up, and sell it as a drink. Like, how do you manage that?
Well, I think growing up, I felt like my value was based around the church, and the extent that my parents would be proud of me was based on how good I was within the church. If I went through all the appropriate steps, ultimately leading up to going on a mission, keeping the commandments, and being that perfect little Mormon boy, like I was talking about that Brescia was. The church was our whole world, and so everything that mattered was the church, and how you accept and act within that culture was the most important thing. And I learned later for myself that's just wrong. That's not the most important thing. That there's so many different cultures, that the world is vast. Mormonism is actually only a small piece of it. A lot of the things that I was taught were just incorrect. But my mom and dad, they still find tremendous value in it, and they have chosen to not look at the anti-Mormon literature and expand their views, and their whole world revolves around that, and they're old at this point. My dad's suffering from dementia. It makes no point. There's no point in him, in me trying to change him and what brings him peace. With my son, the most important thing to me is, I think, unconditional acceptance. And I want him to know that I don't care what he does. If he wants to, if he wants to be a bum on the street, and that's really what he wants, okay, I'll accept it. If he wants to choose to be Mormon and follow the Mormon path and go on a Mormon mission, My only problem with that is that he might actually think that I have a problem with him because of that. No, I don't, I don't believe for a minute in Mormon teachings, but I do see that my son likes the Mormon way of life, and we're very different also. So when I go to the Mormon church and somebody stands up and says, I know this church is true, that bothers me. I'm like, that's really a problem, because you're claiming to know something you can't know, because there's 4 other churches down the road, people making the same claims. They can't all be true. You can't know that, but you make that claim. And that happens weekly in the Mormon church. My son knows that he has a different upbringing than me, because I left the church. He knows there's a lot out there. He knows that he could choose Mormonism, he could choose Christianity, he could choose Judaism, and I would still support him based on that. I wouldn't believe it, if he exercised ultimate beliefs within those organizations, he would know that I don't believe that, but it doesn't take anything away from my acceptance of him choosing that path. And when he chose to be Mormon again, he was genuinely concerned that I would try to talk him out of it. And in fact, the only requirement I had was that he take the discussions from the missionaries in our home as a family, because religion can have a way to separate families. And it's happened in my own family because of me.
For sure.
And I don't want that to happen in my family. So if my son wants to be a Mormon, wants to go on a Mormon mission, and it doesn't bother him, then that's great for him. Let him do it. I mean, there's a lot of good things that happen in the Mormon church, whether it's true or not.
How does he respond? So I guess 2-part related question. How does he respond to your atheism? And in line with that, does he feel pressure to separate? I mean, he's young, he's formidable, he's moldable. Does he feel the pressure to separate from that?
I don't think so. I think he knows that I don't believe in God and that I claim to be an atheist. We can joke about it sometimes. I think it's important to understand that having grown up so religious, I believed that God was creating my feelings. And so when I would contemplate something, and the Mormon church teaches that that's the Holy Ghost speaking to you and teaching you truth. So when I would think about how much I love my wife, or I'm getting sealed to my wife in a temple forever, I would get emotional. And that was, and so I was taught that those emotions were feelings from God telling me that this was right, this was good. And what I learned after I left the church was that I still have those feelings about beliefs and things that I love, and it doesn't change. And I don't think that God directs our emotions. I think those are just part of our body. And so for something to be, I would need some type of evidence that is good evidence. And I don't believe faith is good evidence. So I need some type of evidence that there's God. So I'm an atheist because I don't think there's good evidence that there's God, but I'm totally open, skeptical, but totally open to any evidence and discussion around it. I'm not going to be convinced unless it's good evidence. I've had those conversations.
Oh, go ahead.
I've had those conversations with Marcus, and he knows my perspective. But he also knows that I'm not trying to convince him to anything. I mean, if there's one thing Susie and I have done with our kids, right, well, I think right, but right or wrong, we make a lot of mistakes for sure, but we've given our kids choices, and they know that they have choices. He could be gay. I mean, I actually spoke at my son's baptism, and in a Mormon church, I stood up there on the pulpit and let everybody know that the most important thing to me is, because there's a lot of friends there of his and people that know our family, and there was a lot of speculation that I would be having a problem with that situation because he's getting baptized and I left. And my comment was, Marcus could just as well be marrying a gay partner today, and I would be in the exact same supportive and loving position as I am now. It's just really important that he knows, and all of our kids know, that it doesn't matter what they choose to be or do in life, that we will support them. Unconditional.
So I think what's fascinating is one, like it's interesting your perspective, because I heard a joke one time. It was a stand-up comedian, and he said basically, the way I look at it, God could be a golf club, right? And I don't know the whole premise of the joke. I obviously can't recite it, but that one piece of it has been the cornerstone of my belief in God, is similar to yours. However, I do believe there is something out there with all the evidence of what we can explain. We can't explain it all. So to me, that further lack of explanation is something greater than our existence. But if it's a golf club at the end of the day, that's what it is. I'm open to it. When the time comes, I'll learn, and my life won't be shattered by it. And I think what's fascinating, though, about your family, it's the living embodiment of the antithesis, or what we actually believe is existing versus what we're told exists, right? We're told that people are at each other's throats. You know, there are people who are disassociating. You've experienced it based on certain beliefs, but it's possible if you're just open to the idea that, hey, you can believe something and I can believe something, and we can still love each other, and life can move on in a synergistic way. And I love that your family has that, because I think it's an awesome example of possibility. That was my comments. Were my comments.
I think that's great. I think that when I talk about unconditional acceptance, it's the word unconditional is a really important part of that. It works in my family. It works between me and one of my brothers. Where I think it becomes very difficult to truly accept someone unconditionally within a relationship is when someone in that relationship, or both, make ultimate truth claims that can't be made. For example, my mom and dad, my other brothers and sisters, besides the one I just mentioned, they absolutely love me, and they love to be with me, and they're great people. They're all very active in the Mormon church, and they will tell me that they love me unconditionally, but then they will go to church and say, I know this church is true. And those conflict. So what I hear from them when they say they love me unconditionally, what I hear is, we accept you, we still love you, even though you left the church, you're still our brother, even though you left the church, even though you might not reach that ultimate form of exaltation anymore, we still love you. And that's conditional to me. That's conditional.
Question: you said you hear that? They're not saying that explicitly.
No, they're not saying
but
that.
Are they saying it implicitly? Like, are there other things happening where you're picking that? Because you said you have a brother where it's just like,
here's the difference. With the brother that I'm lockstep with, he's still very active and holds leadership roles within the church, and his wife is a very Orthodox member of the church, and they raise their children in the church and following all the church. But when I sit down and talk to him, when I left the church, he was actually willing to go out and look at the things I looked at, and as far as history about the church, and I'm grateful that he had enough respect for me as a person, just like I did with my business associate, to say, okay, I'm not going to just dismiss everything George is saying. I want to find out for myself. So he knows a lot of the problematic issues with the church and church history, and in doing so, I really believe, and he and I have had conversations, that all of these ultimate truth claims that the church makes, he is skeptical of. You won't hear him get up in church and say, I know this or I know that. Now, he will get up in church and he will say, I believe this, or I hope that, because he loves the church lifestyle. It means a lot to him. Again, he's a different person than I am. He sees real value in raising his family and kids in the religion and in the organization. And there is a lot of social benefit to that. My kids and myself, we kind of paid a high price for leaving the church, living where we do. But when he says, I accept you unconditionally, and we're both likely to be pretty shocked when we die to see what happens, instead of, see, that's the difference. See, he doesn't make claims that this or that is true. He just chose to go a different way because that's what works for him. So I can really respect that. And I love and respect my other brothers and sisters as well. But the fact of the matter is, they think I'm wrong. And I essentially made a bad choice. They're not going to tell me that, but I know the Mormon church, I know the religion, and I know the way I was made to think about people that left the church before I did. And so while they still love me, really care about me,
it's still conditional.
Yeah.
Do they ever try and convince you? Like, do they ever get into like, hey?
No, they don't.
They're past that.
It's tough to have it's tough to have a real conversation with them because of that. To be honest, I have a lot that I could talk about with the religion, and they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it from me.
Yeah. So it's interesting what you just said. So I think you just summed up something that I think I've known and never been able to articulate. Because interestingly enough, I told this to somebody yesterday. The one thing that I know more certainly than anything in my life is that I don't know shit. Like, that is the one thing that I know. But I'm not trying to negate what I just said. And when people make claims that, like, this is the truth versus this is my truth, it is I've always had struggles with any church I've been in with, like, being really evangelical, like, hey, you've got to go spread this message. It's like, but this is mine. Like, I believe this. Like, I'll talk, like, Keith and I, like, our relationship, we met in college, is like, yeah, I'm a Christian, you're not. Let's talk about it. Like, he's like, why are you a Christian? We talked about it. I wasn't trying to convince him to become a Christian, but that's not necessarily how it's taught. Like, it's like, no, that's your job. Like, you're supposed to go teach people this. And then you talked about colonizing earlier, thinking about Joseph Smith and B.Y. Brigham Young and Columbus. Like, that adds a whole nother layer, because I went to a Jesuit Catholic high school, and Jesuits are the fighting priests. They're the ones that are going out colonizing by force. And, like, that adds a whole nother layer to it for me from just a like societal, cultural point of view, like forcing our way of belief and thought on other people. And it's like, I don't really get down with that. I don't get that. But just the way you said that, like, when people make ultimate truth claims, it becomes near impossible to have a productive conversation.
Right. And a meaningful relationship.
Yeah. Cause it's just, near impossible. I'll say near, because I will say, like, my dad, for instance, like, the ultimate truth is, like, the only way you're going to get to heaven is through Jesus. And, like, that's his thing. But we get along just fine. Like, we can have a conversation about religion, things I agree with and don't agree with, and we're cool. There might be a little twinge of, but I'm going to pray for you on Sunday. Like, but you know what? But even with that, like, I'm like, cool. Like, I'll take every prayer I can get. Like,
thank you. Thank you. Because I want to go. I want to get there.
I want to be someplace good when it's over.
So we are miraculously out of time. And the sentiment and feeling of this conversation, I don't even know how to explain it at this point. So I just want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you,
George. Thank you for introducing us to Brescia, being connected to your family. It's coming from a non-religious person, it is a blessing, and I truly appreciate knowing you and taking the time. So, but before we go,
I'd like to ask one question. if you're going to leave our audience, or we're going to ask you right now to leave our audience with a thought, with something to go home with, what would that thing be?
Yeah, for me, that theme is, and we talked about it, but it's be skeptical, but learn to listen.